Welcome to 24/7 Laredo Talk Show. It's an original, free, and independent news and lifestyle channel dedicated to the issues affecting Laredo and surrounding areas. Today, we're very fortunate to have a very good former public servant, Patricia Barrera, who's here to talk to us a little bit about herself. And I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, Patricia, you've been out now for about a year as no longer being a public servant yourself.
Actually, a year and 6 months.
Year and a half. But you were a public official for over 20 years.
25 years.
And your
Exactly.
position was Webb County Tax Assessor-Collector.
Uh-huh.
For those people who obviously are still young and haven't never
Yeah.
voted before, or for those who are, their memories may be fading a little bit, could you tell us a little bit about this position and what you did?
How I got started?
Yes.
At that time, it was 1990, and we had leased out one of our locations to Mercurio Martinez Jr., who was running for county judge. And in reading the newspaper one day, and I was practicing my Spanish, because I used to go like a missionary to different parts in Mexico. So I used the Laredo Morning Times Spanish section. I would read it to practice my Spanish, And I was reading an article that was only in the Spanish section of the Laredo Morning Times. And it was about Sheriff Juan Garza, who was sheriff at that time, asking the Commissioner's Court for pay raises for his staff, for the deputies and all
We're
that.
talking about back 1990.
This is 1990.
91.
This is before March of 1990, before the primary of 1990. And I read that article, and I said, my God, I, at that time, had a trucking company, and I had just prayed and asked the Lord, Lord, do you want me to continue, or do I quit? Because I was having problems, people paying me. I wasn't having problems getting jobs. It was just that people weren't paying me for the job. And yet I had to pay the driver. I had to pay for all the needs of the truck and all that, And so I prayed. My insurance was expiring right before Memorial Day. So I told my driver, you know what? I'm going to park the trucks. We're not going to use them until after Memorial Day, because I'm not going to buy insurance for 3 or 4 days that we're parked, So at that time I prayed, and the driver, I called him. I said, I need for you to bring in, I was missing one truck. I need for you to bring the truck in and park it. Okay, I have to go with my wife to do an errand. I'll be back. He never came. I called his cousin. I called everybody. Sunday, finally, I go to the house of one of his cousins. He tells me they locked him up. He was using my equipment to haul drugs. And he had used it like 4 or 5 times. And one of the guys at the checkpoint had been there beyond the 8 hours. And he saw the same truck and going empty. And he had seen it coming back empty, and now it was going empty. And he pulled him over. And sure enough, he had marijuana and a few other things. Mm-hmm. So my prayer was answered, and I quit. I no longer went into that business, and I quit. And so that was prayer number 1 that I had to have answered. Then when that article came out about the pay raises, I said, who can pay more taxes, I mean, business is not that great. People are struggling, and now to pay an increase in property taxes, So I protested. I went to the Commissioner's Court, and I was able to get some people to give me names of people. And an old man, Mr. Aguilar, I don't know if you remember him, who lived on Park Street, he saw me on TV that I was coming against Commissioner's Court and the sheriff for raising property taxes, that people couldn't handle it. Mr. Aguilar got me more than 800 signatures from all people who would go to the north, and he would find them jobs. And he and a bunch of other people joined me, and we would go to all the Commissioner's Court. We ended up going to court because they passed it. Mr. Aguilar, in one of the Commissioners' meetings, stood up and asked, are you going to vote today or tomorrow? Because I have my wife who's at home blind, and I need to go feed her. And Judy Gutierrez, then Commissioner, said, no, Mr. Aguilar, you go home. We're not going to vote till tomorrow. Then County Judge Andy Ramos said the same thing. No, go home. We won't do it today. And he gets up to go, and the other gentlemen also get up to go. And I go out and say, they're gonna vote. They're not gonna wait for tomorrow. You guys are leaving, they're gonna vote. They said, no, they said that they weren't gonna vote. Sure enough, as soon as they left, they went back to order, and the first thing they did was call the order to vote, and they passed the budget with an increase. I then made a budget fight. I took it to court. Then Julio Garcia, then attorney,
right?
he helped me, he represented me, and only because of a summary judgment we lost, because it was the judge who came from the valley, and he
Those circumstances that obviously you had committed yourself to a lot of hours and
oh well,
and
at the time, thank God, yeah.
at the time, and you had
Well,
quite a few people.
one of the things is that from college, I knew how to do research. So I went and did a lot of research during all that time for my budget fight, and even before the budget was adopted. Okay, so I brought up a lot of things where departments were just a dumping ground, and at that time, the dumping ground for all outgoing county judges was the Webb County Tax Office, and I called it that, a dumping ground. So one day, if you remember Patsy O'Shea,
Of course.
from KVOC,
KVOZ.
she asked me, are you going to run for commissioner? Because Rosie Centeno was up for re-election. I
Rosie
said no.
Centeno was another.
She was a commissioner.
Commissioner at the time.
Yes, from representing the South.
Right.
And I said, no. I didn't even know she was up for re-election. I said, no, that's not the reason why I'm doing this. I'm doing it because people are suffering out there with everything going up. But she insisted on that. You're going to run, right? You're going to run. And then I said, I'll give you a caveat. If, and that's the operative word I said, if I were ever to run for an office, it would be the Webb County Tax Assessor-Collector's office. And everybody's mouth dropped. And she said, why there? Yeah, because it's a dumping ground. We need to stop that. We need to stop giving jobs to people because the elected official is going out of office. And that office doesn't need that large of a staff and the salaries that they're paying. That's when people started coming to me to run against then Ezequiel Laurel, who had been there for 14 years, but had worked there since, I think, 1954.
Well, I remember paying taxes there. That was at the Air Force, the old
Yes.
Air Force base,
Mhm.
and there was no lobby there. You literally just had to wait outside if there was a line.
Well, yeah,
And
the
you-
lines would
line
go out,
on the
yes,
street.
yes,
while
out
you
into
were-
the parking,
to the parking
and the
lot.
sidewalk.
In
They
the
would go out
sidewalk,
to the sidewalk.
and rain and cold, it didn't matter. You
Yeah.
were outside.
Yes.
You got into the picture. You win the election.
I won because of one reason. Everybody said, you're not going to win. They would tell me he's got roots all the way going to Austin. And I said, well, Austin doesn't vote here. So I finally uncovered, because he was part of the old party. And the old party didn't have to pay taxes. They could get away with everything, you know. They were part of the establishment of what ran City of Laredo and Webb County. And I finally found it. I found
When you mentioned the old party, remember we're talking about people who've never heard of the old party.
Right, Partido Viejo.
Could you explain to us what that means?
But Partido Viejo was controlled, I guess, since the 1800s, under the Martin family. You had the Martin sheriff, you had Pepe Martin, who was tax assessor-collector at one time, then became city mayor. They controlled. There were a handful of rich families who controlled the
Right.
county and the city of Laredo, and even the school districts.
Right.
And they provided jobs for people that were loyal to them. They could get
Well,
jobs.
that was the way it was.
That
That's
was the
just
way of life.
The system was that way of life.
And I imagine
And there
it wasn't just
there
Laredo.
It
It was
wasn't
all
Laredo.
over.
It was South
All
Texas
over.
and all over Texas. And
Right.
of course, there was a big street scandal back in the late 70s,
Mm-hmm.
which wiped out obviously the city councilman out of office and everybody involved in the city government. However, the county continued.
Right.
With the same-
It continued because they couldn't root it all out.
Right.
They were controlled.
So you come in, then suddenly the next few years you end up moving your office, or how does that happen?
No, actually, they moved into the Justice Center. It was Memorial Weekend, 1992. Okay, so Ezequiel gets to open up that office. Ezequiel Laurel, he opens up that office, but he's no longer in Laredo. He had moved to the valley working at an appraisal district. He left, I think, like in April. But he maintained getting his both checks. This is how big it was. Both a check for the appraisal district and a check for Webb County as tax, even though he was working in the valley. He no longer was living here.
Things were different back then.
Well, it was still the control of the old party, you know. So I come in, I win, and I won only because on January the 15th, I had a press conference and I announced to the people of Laredo and Webb County that Mr. Laurel and his family had never paid taxes in the 14 years he had been in office. And part of their what they did, because again, the father had attained a lot of property from tax sales. People who would go to the north
Right.
and
They couldn't pay their taxes.
they would put them for sale when they were up on the north, and they would lose their properties. So they had a large land mass in South Laredo, and they would sell those properties, but they would leave it in the name of the buyer. But when the delinquent attorneys came to sue them, they would see who the owner was, and they'd stop the lawsuits. So I didn't attack him. I literally attacked the delinquent attorneys, saying, I brought up, I think it was, I'm going to say like 48,000 just for Webb County, plus the schools, plus the city of Laredo. The taxes had not been paid. And my question was that I was calling for accountability on the delinquent tax collector, delinquent attorneys. Why they would sell a property for $2,000, a homestead for $2,000, and yet here were all these properties. They were commercial properties, or they were I forget how you call those when you sell, but you're still there's a term for it. That once they found out the name of the true owner of the land, they would stop that lawsuit, and they could owe 10, 15,000 in back taxes, but they wouldn't sue those properties because they were part of the Laurel family. And when I announced that, and it came out in the paper, all the TV stations were there, the newspapers were there, it all came out. And I remember, you remember C.Y. Benavides
Of course.
Jr., who was a former county judge. He came to my headquarters and said, "Ya ganaste, ya ganaste," which they were not part of the old party.
No.
The Benavides family have never been part of the old party, Partido Viejo.
Well, things were done different back in the early 90s. You come in, you move to the new building,
Yes.
and now suddenly people could pay taxes. There was a totally different system. What happened?
Actually, everybody who owed taxes that were part of that system, they came and paid before I took office. They were afraid I was going to bring out their names. I would have never done that, you know.
Well, let me tell you one story. When I used to work for Honorable Garza, who's an attorney for LISD, he would always complain that we're collecting taxes for LISD. And, back then, Webb County used to collect the taxes for all the entities.
That's right. Mr. Laurel had those.
And the problem was that people would go pay taxes, and they make sure that they paid the county taxes first. And then everybody else got paid.
Right.
And it was that the school districts were always shortchanged. Always shortchanged.
Yes.
And that was always a major problem.
Yes.
And that's why you do have different...
That's why they opened up their own offices.
Their own offices.
LISD, UISD. We never collected the city.
Yeah.
Okay, but we did the two large school districts. And when I went and gave them a pitch for us to collect their taxes again, I said, it's very simple. Now it's computerized.
Right.
And it goes depending on what ratio you are.
Right.
If you're 50% of the total, 50% goes to you, and then we break it down.
And by that time, they were just so burnt with the county experience that that's why, even though at the end of the day, it's always best to pay in one place. If you have this formula.
Because you will remember, you paid it.
Right.
Fui o no fui?
Yeah.
Did I go or didn't I go?
Yeah.
You know,
But it doesn't work out like that because of the bad experiences.
And especially for the older generation, it's harder for them to remember.
What we're going to do is we'll be right back and talk to Patricia Barrera about what makes a good public servant. We're back with Patricia Barrera, our former Webb County Tax Assessor-Collector. He's here to talk to us a little bit about her stories when she was county tax assessor and about her future as well here in the county. Were you then not politically active? Your family was not politically active?
Not at all. My grandfather had been killed because he was involved in Mexican politics. He was part of the Federalistas.
Right.
And he was killed when my dad was like 12 years old. So for him, you get into politics, they're going to kill you.
Right. And I know it sounds old, but back in the 80s, we did have one or two of those types of cases. When my good friend Honor Eligarde, who ran for office at one point, had that incident occur where somebody was killed over a political fight. It was still going on up to the 80s and 90s. So yes, it was possible.
People were passionate.
People were very passionate, very different than what it is today. At least we are passionate, but we just put our fingers to do the work on the computer, and we don't go out there and do the actual
Fighting
protesting like it used to be.
Yeah.
So you made it almost a career. Did you expect this to go this far, being a tax assessor?
Actually, no. I had already made a decision when I won my 7th election, which was in 2016, that was going to be my last 4 years. And then the opportunity came to run for county judge, and I ran, and I accepted the defeat. That night, I said, uno dice lo que mande Dios, la voluntad de Dios. So that was his desire, and I accepted it, and I moved on.
When you were tax assessor for 25 years, did you see how women were treated? Were they treated, or in politics, are women treated the same as men?
No.
When they're in public office?
No.
How is that?
Well, all I can tell you is that I know that in running for county judge, I don't think Webb County is ready for a female county judge.
Why is that?
I don't know, but I think they still hold us in an inferior position, that women aren't capable. But I believe I proved myself when I was tax assessor-collector. When I came in, like you mentioned earlier, there were long lines. I had one of the employees that I inherited was actually shaving her legs while at work, okay? At the station where she, okay? So there was no...
But back then you could hire and fire whomever you want.
Yes, but
So
she
you
was
did-
not fired, okay? But I came from a family where my dad was left an orphan at 12. His father was killed at 12. And the business that he had built was sold without them knowing the value of that license to do Mexican customs, okay? And my grandmother, to survive and feed her 4 kids, she sold the business, okay? So my dad was a hard worker. He comes back from World War II. He marries my mom. He's working with Zachary out in the brush.
Zachary
on a
Construction,
tractor,
who were very...
on a tractor.
were here for
My
many
mom
years.
had been a sales lady for all her life. She opens up a little store, a little mom and pop store. My dad is told, you either have that business or this job, but you can't have both. That was the control of the employer over the employee. My dad, being the man he was, he said, do that to you, and I'm going with my wife. And so they built the store where my dad grew up. He and an uncle built the entire store with their own hands, okay? And so, because we were paying rent, and they moved to 719 Corpus Christi.
Okay.
And there he started. And I learned at the feet of my mom and of my dad how to work, okay?
That was a grocery store. Was that the grocery store?
Yes.
In Arkansas?
Yes. No, on Corpus Christi.
On Corpus Christi.
Arkansas was our second store.
Okay.
My dad ended up having 6 stores,
My
okay?
goodness.
He was very successful, he and my mom. And my mom was part of all of that. It wasn't just him, it was my mom.
So there was, you obviously
It
were
was
raised by
instilled on
families
us,
there too?
the customer is always right, And when I was growing up, getting ready to go to college, my dad said, you want to go to college? You work, and I'll pay you, and I'll pay your education. You won't have to borrow a penny. I never knew how to borrow a penny because I worked,
Right.
and my dad paid my education.
You know, I
So that's what I brought in to the table
exactly.
when I became tax assessor.
And
I put everybody
I
to
don't think
work.
many people knew your background. And in fact, I thought, where we all saw the results of how quick people came in and out, they paid
yeah.
their taxes, everything
And it was
in order.
right away. It was right away,
everything
Judge.
ran really smooth.
I mean, I walked in, I told them what I expected. I expect everybody to work. Everybody's going to open box. We had so many supervisors standing at the back watching the long lines.
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to go in and learn the business. I had to sit on the bench outside,
Right.
okay? Because Ezequiel was still the tax assessor-collector. So I'm outside and I'm seeing what the supervisors are doing. I said, no, that's not going to continue. I came in and I said, you work at Dillard's where the credit is paid, you're going to open box. You know how to handle money.
Yes.
I'm going to teach you how to do a renewal. Because when there's lunch hours, you're going to sit in the front. Because we need to take those
Right.
taxpayers out as quickly
Well,
as possible. My idea
You
was...
treated everyone equally, pretty
Oh, yeah.
much.
Oh, yeah.
But you knew in the county, though, things were not like that.
The beautiful thing was that nobody helped me. So I didn't have to hire people that they would come and ask me, hire
Right.
this one. I didn't know anybody.
It no longer became
So-
a dump site.
Right. It stopped. So my sister, who had worked at banks, said, what you need are bank people. They know how to handle money. They know how to tell a counterfeit from a counterfeit. And they know the customers because they go to the bank. They know them by name.
Right.
So that was I started hiring people
From the
from
bank.
banks. I didn't know them.
Right.
It wasn't like, I owe you. Did you even vote? I never even looked at that. My thing was, I need your skills, and I've got a position that I can offer you with all these benefits and this great salary.
Well,
And that attracted.
and that attracted a lot of people, and you ended up having a very good team of workers.
Excellent.
But on the flip side, you look at the other county departments during that same period of time, and they were still hiring political patronage.
Yeah.
And there's still, maybe to some degree, some of that is going on at this
yeah.
point.
It's still going on.
It's still going. And so I want to thank you on behalf of many people out there
Thank you.
for your hard work and dedication. And I want to thank you, the public, for watching as well. Please press the like button so you continue to hear stories and candidates and people from our community talking about issues affecting Laredo, so you can be on top of all of those. So thank you again for watching, and I want to thank you again for
Thank
being
you.
here.
Thank you for
Thank you.
welcoming.
Thank you.
God bless you.
God bless you too.
God bless you all.